Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Canada Post handed strike notice for the second time in 6 months by the union representing over 55,000 postal workers. Plus, Stats Can reporting inflation dropped in April because of the consumer carbon tax. And Canada, the UK, and France threaten action against Israel if restrictions on humanitarian aid into Gaza isn't lifted.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Canada Post has been handed a strike notice from the union representing more than 55,000 postal workers. Operations at the Postal Service are poised to shut down by the end of the week for the second time in 6 months. No new items or parcels would be accepted until the strike ends, but mail items already in the system would be secured and not delivered until the end of the strike. Social assistance checks and live animals mark the two exceptions for the continued delivery, though the union says no new animals would be let through. Here is Christopher Reynolds with the Canadian Press.
The union informed management employees plan to hit the picket line starting Friday morning at midnight. And if that goes ahead, that work stoppage would affect millions of residents, millions of businesses who typically receive more than 1 million packages per weekday and more than 8 million letters per day. Weekend work remains a big obstacle in these negotiations. Under the current collective agreement, mail carriers have to be paid overtime for shifts on Saturdays, on Sundays. Canada Post has been pushing for a contingent of part-time workers to be deployed in response to demand, and that would include weekends. Now, the workers, on the other hand, have argued for only full-time work and a slightly less flexible model of schedules and shifts. But this is just one of several points that could drastically affect the future of Canada Post. For the folks worried about continuing to receive social assistance checks, those will flow through the mail if whether or not a strike occurs, but everything else will grind to a halt.
Reynolds adds that due to this labor standoff, Canada Post could now be facing an existential threat. Canadians got a break at the pumps last month, and Stats Canada says the headline inflation number dropped to 1.7% in April as the end of the consumer carbon price sent gas prices lower. That's compared with 2.3% in March, but core inflation was picking up last month at the same time. Canada's job market was taking a hit from the tariff battle with the United States. Stats Can also reporting the unemployment rate rose to 6.9% last month. Israel has begun allowing a trickle of food and medicine into the Gaza Strip after seeing the territory's 2 million Palestinians off from all imports for more than 2.5 months. Thousands of children are now at risk of acute malnutrition in Gaza. A warning, the images in this story may be upsetting.
We know for a fact that there are babies who are in urgent life-saving need of these supplements. That needs to come in because their mothers are unable to feed them themselves. And if they do not get those, they will be in mortal danger.
This is what humanitarian officials warned of as Israel began allowing a trickle of food and medicine into the Gaza Strip following nearly 3 months of blockade. Only 5 trucks have entered Gaza since Monday, according to the UN, a fraction of the 600 that crossed daily during a ceasefire earlier this year. UN agencies say the aid arriving now falls far short of what is needed. The humanitarian crisis is the worst it's been in the 19 months since the war began.
Past experience has very clearly showed that the less aid you get in and the less there is properly distributed in Gaza, the more desperation rises.
Each day, thousands gather at the few charity kitchens that remain. Many go home empty-handed. With aid running low, most people depend on them, but many are shutting down as they've run out of food. Since the start of the war, more than 9,000 children have been admitted or treated for acute malnutrition, UNICEF has said. The increase was dramatic in March, with 3,600 cases, or an 80% increase compared to the 2,000 children treated in February. Aid groups have accused Israel of using starvation as a weapon of war. Israel, for its part, insisted that the blockade was necessary to pressure Hamas into releasing the hostages it still holds.
Meantime, Israel is pressing ahead with its new military offensive in Gaza despite mounting international criticism. Palestinian health officials say Israeli strikes pounded Gaza overnight Tuesday, hitting a family home and a school turned shelter, killing at least 60 people. A total of 85 Palestinians have been killed by airstrikes, and the United Nations says no air raid has reached people in Gaza. 2 days after new supplies began entering the territory. Canada, the UK, and France yesterday threatened concrete actions against Israel if it doesn't stop its renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid. Today, the UK made good on that threat by suspending free trade negotiations with Israel and leveling new sanctions targeting West Bank settlements. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is accusing Canada, the UK, and France of giving Hamas, quote, a huge prize by their threats. Today at the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the development of a new missile defense system called the Golden Dome.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have officially selected an architecture for this state-of-the-art system that will deploy next-generation technologies across the land, sea, and space, including space-based sensors and interceptors. And Canada has called us, and they want to be a part of it. So we'll be talking to them. They want to have protection also. So, as usual, we help Canada do the best we can. This design for the Golden Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term. So we'll have it done in about 3 years. Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles even if they are launched from other sides of the world and even if they are launched from space.
Trump says the Golden Dome will protect the U.S. from missile threats from both China and Russia. The $175 billion system was inspired by Israel's land-based Iron Dome defense shield that protects it from missiles and rockets. 2 people are dead and 20 others injured after a Mexican Navy ship crashed into New York's Brooklyn Bridge over the weekend. According to Mexico's Navy Chief Raimundo Morales, the ship made no distress calls before the accident but called for support instead due to the content in this next clip. We advise viewer discretion.
There's people up there.
Morales says the port pilot maneuvering the sail vessel had little time to stop it because it was docked a short distance away from the bridge. According to U.S. officials, an investigation into the accident will look at possible engine malfunction and the role of a tugboat that assisted the ship in backing out of its pier. The probe will take at least 30 days. Closer to home, the government of Alberta has announced an increase in funding to help victims of gender-based violence. Its 10-year strategy includes a housing benefit that will increase from $6.2 to $8.5 million this year. The housing benefit helps survivors find a safe, stable home by helping pay for expenses like down payments, rent, utilities, and mortgage payments. Each survivor can receive up to $7,200 per year through flexible monthly payments. The benefit is expected to support more than 1,100 Albertans escaping abuse over the next year. A number of physicians in Lethbridge have released a letter to the public that says that the emergency department at Chinook Regional Hospital will continue to be under increased stress due to doctor shortages. In the letter, Dr. Sean Wild and about a dozen other physicians say the challenges of recruitment and traveling doctors coming and going have made it difficult to keep up with schedules for the past year, and it is only going to get worse.
So what's happening is gradually, as that's getting more and more of a problem, we're finding that since last summer, we've been having multiple days a month where there's one physician shift that we can't fill. And that is numbers wise about 15% fewer hours than we normally have covered. Right now, we're in a position where almost every day is like that. And we're worried that as this continues over the coming months, the way it stands right now, we may be losing 2 doctors per day just not able to cover those shifts on many days. And so we're quite worried that that's going to be not enough to see all the patients that we're getting. We do need to increase, ideally, our recruitment of local doctors. In the long term, having the new medical school campus here in Lethbridge should help. Doctors often stay where they train. And also this summer, we're starting to train 1 to 2 emergency specialists in our department each year with a new program in conjunction with the University of Calgary. So we're optimistic that long term that will help recruit people. But in the coming several months to a year or more, we still don't have a great short-term solution for that period.
Dr. Wild says recruiting doctors internationally is a long and expensive process, and it's especially difficult to get them to come to smaller cities like Lethbridge. Well, this week is National Paramedic Services Week. The event kicked off in southern Alberta with a display and information center at Medicine Hat Mall. BCN's Naveen Day was there and has the details.
If your day involves paramedics, it is likely that you are not having a good day. For some of us, however, they are the reason why we are still alive, which is why it is fitting to honor these first responders with a National Paramedic Services Week. In Medicine Hat, the week kicked off with a display of EMS vehicles and equipment. Paramedics were on site to share information on community safety as well as information on how to become a paramedic. Advanced Care Paramedic Ellen Bayton says the response at these types of events is very positive.
We've had people doing CPR challenges, which is really fun for us to do. People are really learning a lot of different things that our equipment, and just all of our things for that. This is not the first time we've actually had a booth in the mall like this for quite a few years. So normally I'm a frontline paramedic. I'm on the streets. I've been doing that for 13 years. So just a fun way to change up our week this week to do something different and get it back into community in a different way than responding to calls.
Attendees at the mall were given opportunities to get up close and personal with some of the equipment, as well as get hands-on and brush up on their CPR skills. Bayton adds the event is beneficial not just for civilians, but for paramedics as well.
I do think they attract more people into the field, and they also really give existing paramedics some of that reminder of why you got into this job. When you're explaining your job to people, why you're there to help people, things like that. There's retention and recruitment. That's a really big part of it for us.
While the job can often be thankless, Bayton says she still finds her job very rewarding. Paramedics can find themselves in peculiar situations, but they are also able to follow up on their calls and get closure.
Memorable moments for myself have been being able to deliver a baby, bringing life into this world in the field. That was my favorite thing I've ever done. So I'm always chasing that again. I would love to do that again. This past year, it's been the first time ever in my career where someone was in cardiac arrest, and we revived them. And about a couple months later, I was able to meet that person again in real life, and they gave thanks to that, which is part of EMS Week too. If people want to give thanks to us and stuff, we're often a thankless job. But it was very cool to meet someone that you actually saved.
National Paramedic Services Week runs until May 24th. You can express gratitude by visiting thankaparamedic.com. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Lethbridge police have charged a 17-year-old boy after he allegedly shot an airsoft gun resembling a pistol directly at occupied vehicles. Last Saturday afternoon, police received several calls about a young male in a red hoodie shooting directly at occupants of vehicles along McMaster Boulevard West and Temple Boulevard West. Some vehicles were dented while others had smashed windshields. When officers arrived, they saw the teen flee from a business, leaving a bag in the custody of another youth. The bag contained a black airsoft gun that resembled a Glock pistol and some ammunition. Police caught up to him a short distance away. The 17-year-old from Lethbridge, who cannot be identified under provisions of the Youth Criminal Justice Act, is facing several charges, including 2 counts of assault with a weapon and carrying a concealed weapon. He was remanded into custody and is scheduled to attend youth court on May 21st. Pothole filling season has returned to Lethbridge. City crews have been back on the streets since mid-April filling potholes, and there's a lot of work still to do. Crews will focus on main roads before moving to residential streets, with some work performed during the night. Residents are asked to slow down and follow posted signage in areas where work is being done and to report potholes to 311 or the City of Lethbridge website.
So potholes are getting created from the melting and thaw action during the winter, right? So normally we wait until all potholes are showing and the frost is out of the ground and until we have hard asphalt. During the winter we have a small operation where we use recycled asphalt to address some, but with a very limited capacity due to weather and staff availabilities. So we really encourage residents to not drive into our work sites, follow the signage, and also not speed around our workers. And then, yeah, just even don't walk into the work sites because there is tack oil that you can get on your shoes.
Besides filling thousands of potholes, the city says it also tackles approximately 800 pothole service requests each and every year. Well, in addition to pothole season, it's also rainy season, and we saw some light sprinkles today. A few more are expected this evening, along with a possible thunderstorm. I will be right back with your weather report. Welcome back. Well, it is a springtime, so naturally we can expect some spring showers, and that's exactly what is in our forecast this week. We are looking at a risk of thunderstorms early this evening and some 30% chance of rain as we look to Wednesday. There also risk of thunderstorm and 40-kilometer-per-hour winds. 18 degrees for the high, though, so not too bad temperature-wise. Into Thursday, a mix of sun and cloud, high 16, and then that rain returns again Friday and Saturday with highs of 16 and 15 respectively. And then on Sunday and Monday, it's going to feel like summertime, highs of 24 and 28 on both of those days. Oh my goodness, Monday could be a record breaker, especially with those nice clear skies. Average high for this time of year, 19, average low 5 degrees. 32 was our record high on this day back in 1919 and 1910. -3 was the record low on this day. Sun rose this morning at 5:40. Sun set this evening at 9:16. So we are looking at 15 hours, 36 minutes of daylight today. As we look to the national forecast for tomorrow, okay, in Victoria, high of 17 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. Vancouver seeing a 70% chance of morning showers, clearing up by the afternoon, high 16 there. 12 for the high in Edmonton with 5 millimeters of rain expected. 14 for the high in Calgary tomorrow with a 60% chance of afternoon showers and a risk of thunderstorm late in the day. 60% also a chance of showers in Saskatoon tomorrow, 12 for the high, 10 for the high in Regina, and 30% chance of showers. Winnipeg seeing a mix of sun and cloud, high of 19 degrees. And then as we get to the central part of the country, 13 for the high in Toronto. Ottawa seeing a high of 16. Both of those cities, 40% chance of rain is what they are looking at there. Montreal, 18 for the expected high, and could see some showers expected in Montreal as well. Actually, Toronto seeing much more rain now that I think back to that. It's actually 5 to 10 millimeters of rain expected there in Toronto. Mix of sun and cloud, though, in both Fredericton and Halifax. High 14 in Fredericton, 15 in Halifax, 8 degrees for the high only in Charlottetown with partly cloudy skies. And a mix of drizzle and showers throughout the day in St. John's with a high of 4 degrees there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The latest Stats Canada report shows that food prices are once again outpacing overall inflation. In April, prices for food purchased from stores rose 3.8% year over year, up from 3.2% in March. The Credit Counseling Society says they've been hearing daily from people who are overwhelmed by the cost of groceries. Many are using credit to cover the gap in their household budgets, while others are skipping essentials or falling behind on other bills just to keep food on the table. Mark Kalinowski with the CCS says maxing out your cards on groceries can lead you to a dead end.
People end up feeling a great deal of stress. They know that bill's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to address it. They just watch it grow. And what we've seen as credit counselors is that they go from one credit card that's covering off the debt to getting a second one so that they can keep going and keep going. And they'll do that again and again and again until ultimately there's no more space. They can't borrow any more money, and they hit a hard brick wall where they just stop paying. They just can't do it anymore. And at that point, there's fear that they might be sued. There's a lot of sense of judgment and shame because they don't feel they're fulfilling their obligations. At the end of the day, they've been put in a very hard spot. You got to feed your family.
This marks the third consecutive month that grocery prices have increased faster than the All Items Consumer Price Index. And if it feels like housing is also getting more unaffordable, well, it's because it is. That's according to a report released by the Frontier Center for Public Policy in partnership with Demographia. To talk more about this is David Lease, President and CEO of the Frontier Center, who sat down with BCN's Naveen Day.
David, what are some of the things that stood out from this report?
This report that the Frontier Center does with the Demographia Center is very much testimony to the reality that if you take a multiple, basically a ratio between one's income, the mean multiple, we call it, and you look at your income versus the mean price of a home, affordability is truly a train wreck in this country in large urban environments. Not all of them, but most. So for example, if you look at Vancouver, it is entirely unaffordable. And this is kind of pointing out the obvious, but if you look at it worldwide, which this report does, and we look at some 95 markets, you can see how Canada, despite it being the second largest nation in the world, is among the most unaffordable places to live. And this is the paradox. And people would ask, well, why is this? It's because in a number of those markets, again, not all of them, but we have urban planning that has stifled the use of land in a way that allows us to have affordable housing.
So what kinds of policy reforms are necessary to restore housing affordability?
One answer, it's very simple. We need to open up land so that people can build housing, so the private sector can deliver housing. We have a long, successful history in this country of the private sector delivering housing. The second one is we need to back away from our almost this fetish focus on increasing density. And it's not to say that density is not a good thing, but you need to have flexibility that allows people to do what they want to do with their land and as they see fit. You also need to open up the turnaround for building permits. Last year, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, when it comes to the organization if we look at OECD countries, Canada actually was at the bottom of the list, the second bottom list in terms of building permit turnaround. I think the only country that did better than us when it came to building permits was Slovakia. No offense to them, but we can do better. And if we do, that allows us to produce more housing that's more affordable. And this is a dire crisis for people.
Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 83 points on the day to 26,055. The Dow was down 114 points to 42,677. The S&P 500 was down 23 to 5940, and the Nasdaq was down 72 points to finish at 19,211. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 13 cents to 62.56 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 31 cents to 3.42 US. Gold was up 67.50 to 32.8967 US an ounce, and silver was up 73 cents to 33.08 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.70 per bushel. Barley is at $6.81. Canola is at $16.14, and corn is at $7.87 per bushel. Live cattle June contract was up 20 cents to $212.55. Feeder cattle were up 33 cents to $296.85. Lean hogs June contract was up 78 cents to $100.03, and the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 71.90 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Canadians could find themselves suffering through a postal strike later this week. Postal workers have issued strike notice to Canada Post and could walk off the job Friday morning at midnight. While no new mail will be accepted until after the strike ends, Canada Post says delivery of social assistance checks would continue. Lots to talk about in Canadian politics with the suspension of counter tariffs. Many Canadians are still in survival mode when it comes to affordability, and now Stats Canada shows the numbers that prove inflation was tied to the consumer carbon tax. Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly will give us his take on these issues and more. That is all coming up next. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. While in Rome, our new PM meets with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Mark Carney also suspends counter tariffs despite saying he wouldn't. And StatsCan reporting the inflation rate drops, but the reason might be surprising to some. Here to unpack it all is political commentator and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly. Brian, hello.
Hi, good to see you again.
You as well. Okay, so let's start with that last one, shall we? So Statistics Canada says the inflation rate dropped in April, and the reason is the consumer carbon tax was dropped. But Brian, didn't the Liberal government spend years saying that there was no relation between the inflation and the consumer carbon tax?
Oh, they told you you were going to be better off. You'd be richer. You'd be richer, Jeanette, because of the carbon tax. We're all so much richer because we're paying more. Look, it was a matter of dispute for the Trudeau government. Mark Carney, now the Prime Minister, leading the same Liberal government that Justin Trudeau led, had also defended the carbon tax against it being inflationary. The only reason, of course, that Mark Carney got rid of the carbon tax, well, it didn't get rid of it yet. He says he will once Parliament resumes, but he reduced the rate to zero, was because he said it had become too divisive. But we all knew that adding costs onto fuel, that was going to increase the price of goods. And we saw that over the years. Now, the inflation rate in March was 2.3%. The inflation rate in April dropped to 1.7%. And it's not me saying that this was partly due to the carbon tax dropping. It was Statistics Canada saying that. Now, we also know that right at the beginning of April, of course, we had what Donald Trump called Liberation Day, imposing taxes around the world. That created a lot of market chaos. I don't have to tell anyone based in Alberta what that did to the price of oil, a precipitous drop, causing problems for your provincial economy and provincial budget. But all of that to say that part of the drop was due to the consumer carbon tax being dropped to zero on April 1st. Now, food inflation is still up at about 3.8%. That is much higher than it is in the United States. We'll have to see if that comes down in the future, because we do know that the carbon tax had an impact on the price of food, the price of just about everything. But dropping it in the month of April clearly had an impact on the inflation rate, despite years of the Trudeau government telling us, no, don't believe your lying eyes. This is good for you.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of money, Mark Carney reversed course over the weekend and announced that there will be a budget this year, that there actually will be one, but not until the fall. So why the change of heart and why the wait, Brian?
So, this was really interesting. PM Carney announced his cabinet on Wednesday. There was the good, there was the bad, there was the ugly. People gave their different reviews of it. But there's a lot of positive reviews of the cabinet. Maybe not from me, but some others. And Francois-Philippe Champagne is the new finance minister. And he comes out on Thursday, the first cabinet meeting, and tells reporters, they're asking him, well, when will the budget be? And he's like, oh, no, we're gonna bring in the middle tax cut. We're gonna have the speech from the throne, and then we'll have a fall economic statement. What, no budget? No, we'll have a fall economic statement. And so it was like that from Thursday until the weekend, when Prime Minister Carney's in Rome speaking to reporters, and he gets asked about this, and he changes his tune. So he left it for several days. As I say in my column, he allowed Frankie Bubbles, which is my nickname for the finance minister, he allowed Frankie Bubbles' exuberance to spill over for days, with everyone thinking there was no budget. This isn't good for the economy. It's not good for our credit rating. And then Mark Carney had to put a cork in it and clean up on aisle 3. He came out and said, no, we're going to have a budget, but it will be in the fall. Now, look, I think they could still do a budget this spring. The finance department is filled with highly skilled people who would be able to go out there and do the right thing, come up with a budget, come up with it quickly. The reason that they won't is political. But when pressed, Prime Minister Carney did come up with some valid reasons for why putting it off to the fall is a good idea. So, got to give credit where credit is due. You got to criticize when they need it and give credit when they need it. So when asked, well, why not this spring? He said, first off, the House is scheduled to rise on June 20th. Now, they could sit into the summer. That's absolutely correct. But the NATO summit is on June 23rd and 24th. And that's going to have an impact, as Carney correctly pointed out, on the Canadian budget, because there's going to be a lot of pressure on Canada to spend more on defense. Then he said there's the ongoing talks with the Americans surrounding tariffs and the economic relationship. What kind of impact will that have? The Americans are ready to deal. They're ready to talk to us. They say it's up to us. So that could have an impact on the budget. Why bring out a budget and then sign a deal with the Americans? And then thirdly, he said they're going to be looking over the summer for efficiencies in government, trying to make the public service, which has ballooned under the Liberals dramatically, up 40%. They're going to be looking for ways to make them more productive, more efficient, and find savings. You put all that together and you say, okay, waiting a few months from the election is acceptable. That has happened under previous prime ministers, Liberal and Conservative. But saying that we didn't need a budget until next year, that was completely unacceptable. So a compromise, meet in the middle, sometime late September, early October, a budget will come out.
All right. Okay. You mentioned cleanup aisle 3. It looked like Carney also had to do some cleanup aisle 5 this time after his newly appointed housing minister said that housing prices didn't need to come down. But the PM didn't exactly say prices need to drop either. He only hinted at it. So what can you tell us here, Brian?
Well, so look, what is the problem with housing affordability? Houses cost too much. The government's kind of caught in a pickle. They were just elected by people mainly over 55, people in the boomer cohort who were worried about the value of their assets, their retirement savings, and their home, which is everyone's biggest purchase, their biggest asset, right? Where for most of us, that is our biggest asset. And that cohort is worried about, what do you mean prices have to drop? This is my nest egg. I can't afford for the home that I paid $75,000 for to drop from $1 million down to $869,000. I need that money to retire. And so they don't want the prices to go down. But if prices don't go down, can someone living in Vancouver, in Toronto, in Calgary, in Edmonton, can young people who are priced out of the market afford to buy in? Well, not necessarily. And so Gregor Robertson, the former mayor of Vancouver, who oversaw a dramatic increase in the price of housing while he was mayor. And of course, municipalities have the greatest responsibility for housing and housing policy and driving up the cost through development charges. He just said, no, we don't need to see housing prices come down. Carney came out and he said, we've got to look at the whole thing, affordability prices. You don't necessarily want people's existing homes coming down, but can we find ways to make it more affordable for young people? So he's trying to thread the needle. He's trying to play both sides. This was not a great moment for his government, neither Gregor Robertson's comments nor his attempt at cleanup. It is just one of many cleanups that they've had to do over the past couple of weeks. And it's a bit of a mess out there.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, Brian, it was revealed last week that despite saying he was using counter tariffs to execute maximum pain on Americans, which in reality actually inflicts pain on Canadians. So the Carney government then approved eliminating or suspending most tariffs on April 16th, and that move took effect on May the 7th. So that move doesn't seem to match the elbows up rhetoric the Liberals used in the campaign.
Elbows
now,
up.
does it?
Elbows up, right? I mean, this is what we heard all through the election. And yet 12 days before voting day, the Carney government moved to either reduce, eliminate, or suspend tariffs on 97% of goods that were going to be tariffed. So, we've effectively got our tariff rate at 0, which is what the Americans wanted. And yet all through the campaign, so the April 16th, by the way, I want to point out that was the date before the French debate. April 18th was the English debate. Mark Carney didn't talk about that there. He talked about the same thing, imposing maximum pain on the Americans. You rightly point out it imposes pain on Canadians. But this was the rhetoric that he talked about. Now, he did make a mention of we're moving off dollar for dollar tariffs. And some liberals are saying, see, well, no, he said it during the election. You guys just didn't catch it. No, that is something completely different. We were never going dollar for dollar under the Trudeau plan nor the Carney plan. So don't be too cute by half. You guys said one thing. You said elbows up. You said inflict pain on the Americans, but not Canadians. And then you lowered them. And guess when they took effect? The day after Mark Carney went to the White House. So, you see that picture of the Carney and Trump standing side by side with the thumbs up. Did Mark Carney just tell him, hey, Donald, we got rid of all your tariffs? Voters were had. They were absolutely had because this guy sold one thing and delivered something else.
Yeah, it's interesting that nobody's really talking about that either. And then speaking of Carney with the Americans, so he was in the Vatican for the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV. And while there, he held various meetings, including with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. But weren't we told that meeting with people like Vance was not acceptable?
Oh, conservative MP Jamil Javani, who is old friends with J.D. Vance. They went to Yale Law School together. Jamil Javani was in Vance's wedding party. Or I don't know if he was in the wedding party or he did a reading at the wedding. He's been asked to denounce his longtime friend. He has been on the record as saying, look, I've told him don't come visit right now. It's not good. It wouldn't be good for us, wouldn't be good for me politically.
Right.
And yet there is Mark Carney sitting down talking with J.D. Vance at on the sidelines of Pope Leo XIV's inaugural Mass. Now, I'll say this. Both men are Catholics who take their faith seriously. Mark Carney is definitely on the left wing, not just politically, but from a religious, philosophical point of view. J.D. Vance is from the conservative side, but they would still have an awful lot in common. So my guess is a lot of the conversation revolved around that, but also politics as well. But, why is it okay for, Mark Carney to go thumbs up with Donald Trump, to meet with J.D. Vance, to lower the tariffs, while going around saying that you can't elect Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives because he'll kneel before Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd? What are you doing, Mark Carney? Like you're doing what you're accusing the others of. What's that old saying? When you're pointing your finger at someone, you got three pointing back at you?
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, Mark.
All right. A joint statement by the leaders of Canada, France, and the UK is being criticized right now after it received praise and a thank you from the terrorist group Hamas. So, Brian, I believe the countries are condemning Israel for blocking aid. So what happened there?
Yeah, they're saying that Israel is blocking aid, which Israel disputes. They're also saying that Israel is going too far in terms of how it's handling its military operations in Gaza in response to the fact that Hamas has not returned all the hostages, will not surrender, continues to attack Israel. Israel just has a far superior military. And so it's a bit of a one-sided war, absolutely. But if it's a one-sided war and one side is losing badly, maybe the folks leading that should surrender. That is not the focus of the message from Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or Emmanuel Macron, the President of the French Republic. So the three of them got together, put out a statement, and there's a brief mention of returning the hostages, but most of it is about denouncing Israel. I'm sorry, but Israel did not start this war. Israel would give up this war tomorrow if the hostages were returned and Hamas surrendered. Hamas will not do that. I'll give the Carney government credit. They have said that Hamas cannot be part of the future of Gaza. That should be a no-brainer for anyone. But even that is not really the focus of their statement. Their statement was to showcase to the progressive world that they're on side with them in denouncing Israel, our democratic ally. We're very concerned about what the United States is saying about Canada right now and saying, well, wait a minute, you're our ally. Why are you saying these things? And then we turn around and we put out a statement that denounces our democratic ally in the Middle East and is so one-sided that Hamas says, oh yeah, this is a good statement. if a listed banned terrorist organization is praising your statement, maybe you want to reconsider your choice of words.
Brian Lilly, political columnist with the Toronto Sun. Thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate having you on, as always.
Thanks for having me.
A group of researchers from all over the world are closely examining the long-term effects that spaceflight has on the human mind and body. There are 2 Canadian experts involved in the research project, and they are both from our own University of Lethbridge. Joining us today to tell us more about this is Dr. Gerlinda Metz. She is a professor with the University of Lethbridge's Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience. Dr. Metz, it's great to have you with us. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much, Naveen. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great to have you back on our show again. And it must be exciting to be working with a team of experts from all around the world. Can you just share a little bit more about what this research will be trying to accomplish?
So we're very excited that we're part of this very significant project because it is NASA's largest ever research effort with human subjects, with astronauts. And so they're actually attempting to integrate an immense amount of data all together into one cohesive database to make better sense of health for astronauts. And this project is directed by Dr. Afshin Beheshti, who is a professor and director of the Space Biomedicine Institute at the University of Pittsburgh. And he has a long record of working with NASA. And on the team are also Tony Montina, who is the NMR and MRI facility director here at the University of Lethbridge. So we're very excited to be a part of this large research effort.
So you're talking about the University of Pittsburgh, you're talking about NASA. How did all this come together, and why the University of Lethbridge?
Actually, we already had established collaboration with NASA for a number of years. We have helped them to investigate molecules in the body, in blood and urine that we obtained from space, from the astronauts who lived on the International Space Station for a prolonged mission. And so these projects have been going very well. And we were invited to continue this collaboration and actually expand with additional numbers of samples. And so here now we have access to this very significant amount of data so that we can integrate our data with their database that involves multiple levels of biological regulations that are linked to spaceflight. And this is a really exciting project and very important also as a learning experience, not only for space flight, because we are going into becoming a more of a spacefaring civilization these days, but really we're also learning important lessons for life on Earth as well.
So what is your role in particular going to be focusing on?
So our project will focus on molecular chemistry. We will actually investigate small molecules called metabolites in urine and blood of astronauts. So they're giving us samples from before they went to space, during the space station stay in the mission, and then after they returned back to Earth. And so we have a long time course of regular samples being collected, which is very exciting. And so we can actually look at individual astronaut samples and how they changed over time, but we can also compare across different individuals. And what is also really phenomenal in this project is that for the first time we'll have a larger group of female astronauts, because small astronauts are males. And we didn't actually have many studies that investigated sex differences, so how females compare to males. And females have very different health conditions and stress responses than males. And it is very important to learn more about how do we better while we're on a long duration space mission, and what do we expect in terms of health outcomes, what can we predict for male versus female astronauts.
So you're talking about blood and urine samples before they go to space and then after they return home. What have you What kind of differences have you noticed with these blood and urine samples before and after?
It's very interesting that actually males adapt a little bit faster to the stress and the mission when they're going to the International Space Station than females would. And we need to take this into account in what kind of markers we're looking for. And it's very important to look at these small metabolites, these small molecules in very accessible samples like urine that you can easily provide so we can follow up with health measurements. And this is important when we go to space because space is a very, very harsh environment. These astronauts are going through extreme levels of stress, not only psychologically, but also physiologically and physically. We have also microgravity or zero gravity. We have lower levels of a magnetic field than we have on Earth. We have very cold temperatures. We have very dry air. We also have various levels of radiation. This is a very harsh environment that astronauts enter into, and there are all kinds of health complications that they might be at risk. And so we want to better understand, with looking at these molecules, what risks are they to be expected, but also how can we produce countermeasures and treatments for them to prevent these adverse health outcomes for them.
And you mentioned one of your colleagues, Tony Montina, who is also working on the project. Can you explain a bit about what his focus will be on?
So my colleague, Tony Montina, he's the director of the NMR facility. We're using what we call nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. That is a mouthful, but what we're doing is we study small molecules. And when you look, for example, at a urine sample, you actually have 200 different types of these small molecules you can measure. So it's like a very personal fingerprint of what is going on inside of the body. Every cell is producing these small metabolites, and they are then measurable in liquids or in any tissue of the body. But here, when we work with urine, we have to make sure we're looking at these metabolites as a kind of a reflection of what is going on inside the body and inside our cells.
It's just so fascinating how spaceflight can affect your body and can affect the mind. And apparently spaceflight also affects mitochondria, which generate energy for the human cell. What do we know about how and why mitochondria is changed by spaceflight, and what are some potential solutions?
So mitochondria are like the powerhouses of the cell. Every cell has mitochondria. And what happens when we're going through extreme stress or we're especially entering a space environment, these mitochondria might go into, some at least, into a dysfunctional state. This is such an extreme impact on the body to go to space with all the different stresses going on, that mitochondria might be disrupted in their normal function. So they actually produce less energy than what we would like to see and what the body would need. Because every cell has mitochondria and because organs are made out of cells, cells can actually lead to diseases in various organs through mitochondrial disruption. So this is something that is a very important learning experience, because what we're seeing also in aging on Earth often is that mitochondria become dysfunctional. So we actually learn a great deal about aging on Earth. So what can we do about it? That's an important question. And we have actually developed on Earth, through many clinical studies, various drug treatments that can improve mitochondrial function. Now that we know that's actually based on Dr. Afshin Beheshti's work, that mitochondria are dysfunctional in space. We can use and test some of these therapies that we have available, and maybe even dietary countermeasures could be effective. So for example, think of antioxidants that reduce the amount of cellular stress that would protect mitochondria in their function. There are many other ways of how drugs could affect and boost mitochondrial function. And so these need to be tested now that we have realized that there is an issue. We can now hopefully help astronauts stay healthier for longer in space.
And I'm told that astronauts have a higher risk of cancer. And you had mentioned earlier that there's a lot of radiation up in space, so that might be behind it. But what else would be behind it other than radiation? And will your research be exploring this area as well?
So cancer, indeed, like you say, is a very important risk factor that we need to take into account for space flight. And we have low levels of radiation. We also have ionizing, very strong resources of radiation, such as solar flares produced when the sun is very active and it's going through cycles where it's more or less active. And when it's highly active, this is more putting a higher risk on the body. Also, we have cosmic radiation that is always there, and we have ionizing radiation when particles meet the Earth's magnetic field. So we have various sources of radiation that can potentially cause cancer. So that is a significant risk factor. We are also worried about that, for example, for pilots who actually go into higher levels of in our atmosphere, and they also experience potentially higher levels of radiation by flying. So we need to learn about these health risks. What this radiation can actually do is induce DNA damage. So that's the genetic code in our cells, and that can actually trigger some cancerous risk factors that lead to tumor growth in the body. And we have to learn about these risks and also how to prevent them, potentially through drugs or dietary countermeasures.
And what about eye disorders from spaceflight? What is it that affects the eyes negatively?
Yeah, there are actually various risk factors again when we go to outer space. First of all, the weightlessness we're going through lower levels of gravity is shifting the fluid in the body. And actually, we have more liquids, more fluids going into our heads and our upper body. So this actually can affect the eyes, and often we're seeing also that faces become more puffy over time when they're in space. We might adapt to that with longer periods in space to some degree, but still we still talk about this kind of puffy face or moon face in astronauts because the fluids in the body are moving up. So this can also change the pressure inside of the brain. It can also change the pressure inside of our eye bulbs. And it will push the eye bulbs to be flatter than we usually have, which leads to the picture not displaying correctly on the retina. In addition, we also have issues with radiation that can harm the retina, which includes nerve cells and the optic nerve as well. So we might have some degenerative changes there over time. And that's something to be concerned about as well.
And then there's some other health risks. I'll just list off a few here. Cardiovascular disease, renal issues such as kidney stones, disruption of circadian rhythms are also risks. And I've even heard that some astronauts experience bone loss.
Yeah, that's actually a factor that many think of first when they think about space flights, because with the zero gravity or low levels of putting our weight on the body, we are losing bone mass over time. And that's something we also experience on Earth with aging, that often we do have more breakable bones, more sensitive bones. And so astronauts experience that at a much higher, faster rate than we have on Earth. So astronauts might experience 1% of bone loss in actually a few days, whereas on Earth, we experience 3% of bone loss within a decade. So it goes really, really fast for astronauts. And that's because they don't put enough weight on their legs, for example. So the legs become very sensitive to damage. And there are several countermeasures. For example, astronauts are recommended to exercise for at least 2 hours a day. Exercise helps, and muscle activity is important because also we lose muscle mass when we're in outer space, for the same reasons that we're not putting enough weight on our limbs and we don't stay upright.
Dr. Gerlinda Metz is a professor with the University of Lethbridge's Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience and is part of a global research team studying the long-term effects of spaceflight. Dr. Metz, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.